Okay, everyone. I think without further ado, we probably should get going. I know we've only got 30 minutes. Welcome everyone to our first webinar, first in a series of webinars that we're going to be doing monthly at EnergyGigs. My name is Jason Assir. I'm the CEO of EnergyGigs. And on the call, we also have Jason Fisher, who is our market development executive. And then also running the show behind the scenes is Juliana Herman, who is our VP of marketing. So this is, as we said, the first in the series of monthly webinars we plan to do for the energy industry in and around the energy industry and workforce of the future. So we'll be talking about all sorts of subject matters, from energy transition to conventional energy sources to how to get ahead as a freelancer or an independent consultant, contractor in the space. And so without further ado, we'll start talking about our subject of today. So, the topic of the day really is how energy transition and workforce transition impact each other. And we're going to be talking about that. And really it comes down to sort of two main prisms through which you can, or lenses through which you can look at this question. One is the company perspective. The other is the person or the people perspective. So we're going to talk about those two different lenses. Then we're going to talk about a little bit briefly about what we do at EnergyGigs in connection to those two things, and then we'll open up to QA. So before we dive into it a little bit further, we just want to talk a little bit about some definitions, and because you'll be hearing us use certain words, certain phrases, and we kind of use them somewhat interchangeably. So a lot of times in the energy industry, you hear the phrase energy transition, and we use it here as well. But we also use energy transition synonymously for energy future. And from our perspective, an energy future is an energy future that is diversified. So it includes conventional energy sources. It also includes sort of leading technologies, new technologies coming into the future. And as a company, what we want to do is support that energy future by helping, companies and people, navigate their ways through that sort of journey. So there's no, specific endpoint in mind when we think about the energy future. It's wherever energy is or wherever energy is going is where we would like to be and where we want to support, independent freelancers, consultants, and companies. So with those definitions out of the way, we can jump into somewhat of the meat of the topic. So looking at really the perspective of companies, at a high level, how does energy transition and workforce transition impact each other? Companies obviously are pretty critical to that because they are where most of us go to work. We go there either as employees or we go there as consultants and contractors. And so what we wanted to do is look at it from the standpoint of sort of companies in transition or not in transition, but look at it from three different sort of perspectives. So at a high level, you have companies that are investing in new energies and new technologies. Then you have sort of a secondary approach is companies that are revitalizing or updating underutilized assets and turning them into new asset classes that can be used to generate profitability. And then the last case is sort of conventional energy companies that are just reinvesting in producing assets, reinvesting in the existing business models that they already have. And, companies like, Shell and Exxon and, those types of companies. So without further ado, I think we'll probably jump right into the first category, which is companies investing in new energies and new technologies. And Jason, when you think about that, what really springs to mind for you? What's the most interesting things in the new technology front, the leading edge side of things?
Hi, everyone. For me, one of the most interesting things, it's largely in Europe, is offshore wind. Lots of the oil and gas majors in Europe, they are reinvesting their time, talent, and dollars into converting old oil and gas offshore platforms into offshore wind platforms. So they're utilizing their years of knowledge on developing offshore platforms in the sea to creating offshore wind platforms in the sea. So then their knowledge it's easily transferable because it's one and the same. You're all developing some form of platform that should be stable at the sea floor with massive structure above the sea, the top of the ocean, and being out there for many years and surviving, being maintained and upkept for a long time. So I think that's very interesting, and it has not translated to anywhere, much places across the world outside of Europe.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one very interesting aspect of, focusing on new technologies using from traditional companies. Another one, which is, straightforward for me with my background, is geothermal.
Yeah.
Right. It's definitely not new. It's been around for over 100 years. At the power side, but there are many companies now investing in exploring how can we harness geothermal from our existing assets, whether it's abandoned assets that are not producing anymore, i.e. in the oil and gas field, it's very commonplace now for everybody to start look at how can we use these assets instead of retiring them, plugging and abandon these wells, what can we use it for? Can we generate some form of power? Can we generate some form of heat? So that's another new and interesting technology it's blowing up, and lots of oil companies are using it to help keep their carbon footprint low.
Jason,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask you, like, I just saw that you posted on something on LinkedIn about Baker Hughes and the new center that they have, I think.
Yeah, so that's one of the new interesting thing that's happening. The Baker Hughes has developed the first ever advanced geothermal closed loop testing facility in the entire world. And the first company that's charged with helping them to get everything up and running is Greenfire Energy out of California, which their goal is, their product is a single well borehole geothermal system. So that's great news to find out that there's such a facility now exists, and hopefully we can get a tour at some point.
Yeah.
But we're looking forward to that as it further develops and grows, because I'm sure more companies will definitely dive into it and want to be a part of it. Because I could think of a few companies that should be a part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one other technology that's growing and will probably be the key for getting us closer to the low carbon goal is carbon capture technology. It is probably the easiest thing to attach to any existing infrastructure, whether it's oil and gas, cement manufacturing, any form of industrial processes. It's very easy to adapt to any situation, and it will help to reduce the carbon footprint of all the industries. It's probably the only technology that can be applied literally everywhere, regardless of the industry that you're in. And there are many different kinds. We could spend hours talking about the different types of carbon capture. The most common ones is post combustion and direct air capture, which you can, direct air capture is where you just literally just walk around and collect it from the air. It's not very difficult, but the membranes that are utilized is pretty difficult, and it's not very cheap, direct air capture. But the other aspect of carbon capture from post combustion has been going on since 1995. It started in Sleipner and somewhere in Netherlands, a natural gas facility. So experience for that has been around for a while. So it's just, we need to make sure more people know about it. We need to create more awareness that these technologies have existed for a while, and we need to encourage people to go explore or just teach more about it so people actually know that it exists.
Mm-hmm. On the thread of wind and offshore wind, I just saw also an announcement. There was I think a conference or a workshop in Washington, D.C. here in the U.S. Around offshore wind, specifically a desire to look at floating, installations versus like installations that are tethered to the ocean floor. And, that's when you think about transitional, technologies, oil and gas, deep water, like the experience that oil and gas companies have working at depth without actually tying into the ocean floor. Like there's already an expertise area in that space that it's almost a natural, taking out the capital, requirements for building things like that. But like the technology from an engineering perspective, there's that knowledge base is already there to start taking advantage of that and building stuff, floating offshore.
It still has to be tethered somehow, because if the conference will focus on offshore wind in Gulf of Mexico or on the eastern coast, there's always a threat of hurricanes. 6 months out of the year, you have a hurricane threat. So if it's not tethered, it's going to be a mess.
Yeah,
it's going to be a mess. So it's something to always consider. But the oil and gas has tons of experience in it. And Europe is leading the charge on that. I think the UK said they converted, I don't know, 50,000 workers from oil and gas into offshore wind.
Mm-hmm.
So if anybody here or anybody has any friends or contacts interested in offshore wind or has subsea experience, that is the ideal field for them to transition into.
Mm-hmm. You know, another area that I'm really pretty keen on, and I know there may be still some technology hurdles, is just the concept and ideas around hydrogen and using hydrogen as sort of a fuel for grid level energy storage, and you know, creating hydrogen. Now, granted, there are the challenges around transportation and you know, how do you make it safe? But there's some really interesting things there. And I've also heard, I think in a talk you gave just the other day around, you know, generating hydrogen via geothermal, like having an integrated facility. Like, have you seen any plants like that doing that, or?
They're talking about it. All of it is just talking and trying to figure out the schematics and engineering and how would it work, and where would you get the water to break to get hydrogen? That's the biggest challenge. You know, there are so many countries around the world that are water stressed. Why would we go and take why would we take water to crack it into hydrogen to produce energy when you could just give that water to thirsty people? So that's a big dilemma with hydrogen. Where do we get the water from? But then on another note, in large urban areas and urban cities where there's this massive sewage use, then there's a stock of using gray water to create hydrogen, right? So in that case, you create a circular economy, which is ideal. But in countries where they have little water resources, then it's difficult to think about, oh, let's create hydrogen. You know? So that's one of the big hurdles. And then, you know, we have to think about the hydrogen rainbow. That's the biggest challenge, I think. You know, you have green, red, gray, pink, blue, and it just makes it confusing and difficult. Kind of turns people off from hydrogen because, you know, it's just too much. It's not simple.
That's the, like, how hydrogen is being created, right? Like that's the
right. Correct. Yeah. If it's being created from any form of green energy, then it's green. I think if it's nuclear energy, then it's pink. And then if it's gray, I don't know. It's too much. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's not very straightforward. So I think that's why it has not achieved a high level of social acceptance.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's move on then, if you will, to like companies that, you know, revitalizing old or underutilized assets. And I think you mentioned also, like, you know, wind companies in Europe, I believe, using retrofitting offshore platforms for wind. Is that right? Like that?
Yes, the number one company doing that, the major in Europe, is Equinor. I think they have about 12 to 20 gigawatts of offshore wind installed and operating at the moment. And then outside of Equinor, there's Shell that's trying to get some stuff done. And BP is in it for a little bit, but not much. It's about 3 or 4 majors in that space in Europe, but nothing in the US. There's probably 1 or 2 offshore wind installations in the US, and it's not very big. And in geothermal, there's a lot. There's one of somebody we work closely with, Bedrock, is working on, you know, decarbonizing buildings. And then you have Petrolearn, who is working on helping oil and gas companies identify if their old assets or assets they're considering abandoning are good enough for geothermal. You know, I don't know if you guys are current on the geothermal space, but the OSU, the University of Oklahoma, I think they just completed a pilot on turning an abandoned oil and gas well into a geothermal well. It was successful, and it generated heat and a little bit of power. So there are many developments happening. You won't hear about it from a lot of the majors because they like to keep some of their work, you know, a secret. But there's a lot of work going on, including Repsol. Repsol has a lot of geothermal work going on, but they don't talk about it that much.
I guess in the same category, and it's maybe not even really new, but it's the you know, using supercritical carbon, right? Like for enhanced oil recovery. I mean, that's been around for a while, right? Like that's not
just using CO2. The CO2 flooding for enhanced oil recovery, EOR, commonly used 3-letter word acronym. So EOR has been going on for a long time, but the source of that carbon was natural. So natural formations that had high CO2, so they were just capturing that, using that. But one of the more interesting studies is the Weyburn project that captures CO2 from coal plants or chemical coal plants, and then it's sent to Canada, where it is used for CO2 flooding to capture more oil and gas from reservoirs. And then for supercritical CO2, that's being considered for utilization in geothermal, advanced and closed loop geothermal systems. It's one of Greenfire's patents on capturing CO2 and then using it as supercritical CO2 as a working fluid to capture and transfer heat instead of using water.
Yeah. I guess then, moving into sort of that last category for companies, where companies are just reinvesting in existing assets, and I think, and are just doing well in that regard. It kind of speaks a little bit to the challenges or the reality of the geopolitical situation in the world, that we're still very dependent upon oil and gas and fossil fuel based economies, and countries that have made a transition or try to make a transition too soon, and not kept up certain assets or invested in certain assets are finding themselves in a bit of a pinch, specifically with obviously the geopolitical situation with Russia and Ukraine, but like Chevron, Exxon, the super majors in the US that have not played as much in the energy transition, they have record profits in terms of how they've done, and so it seems like there's still a long road for these companies to be profitable in conventional areas, right?
Yeah, that is true. But then I think Chevron's case is unique because years ago they used to dominate the geothermal landscape in Indonesia, and they sold out all those assets. But now with the current landscape, they're trying to buy back assets. So they're trying to get back into the geothermal space. They're partnering with companies in Indonesia, and they're looking for geothermal assets to buy to get back into that space to bolster their business model of not just oil and gas, but oil and geothermal, since they go well together. And other companies like Scientific Drilling, Baker Hughes, they're all developing some form of carbon capture technology in order to help them become net zero, so they can sell that as a service or attach it to their currently producing assets. Yeah.
Well, so now, let's bring this back home to sort of the people on the call, and through our mission of helping to connect people to opportunities. For people, I guess, what, like these three sort of categories with companies, like how does this influence, workforce transition? How does this influence like how we should go about and find work in these different developing areas or existing areas? What do you think?
Well, for one thing, we still need people in the conventional energy industry. There's a thought in our head that everybody can just leave that industry and go find a renewable energy job, but then we're still so dependent on traditional fuel sources in our economies, because I think a lot of people don't realize that for oil and gas, it's not just about the energy, it's about the byproducts. And the byproducts are everywhere in their house. There's rubber, there's silicone, there's so much things from the byproducts of oil and gas that it'll take, 100 years for us to phase out some of these things, especially with the growing use and need of technology. We need more silicone, we need more rubber elements. We drive cars every day, there are things in cars, plastic, rubber, all those things are derived from petroleum. Yeah. So it's not just about the energy. So the idea for me is that we still need conventional people in these spaces. One of these spaces is natural gas. Utilization of natural gas will continue to grow as its carbon footprint is lower than oil, right? And as you can see with the geopolitical situation in Europe, they're importing lots and lots of natural gas. So then we know for the next, 50 years, we're still going to need people in the natural gas industry, in the cryogenics field, mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, anybody that works in that field, you will still be needed. If they don't know, they can hear it from me, they can hear it here. You will still be needed for a long time. And outside of that, people that don't want to, if you're working in traditional oil and gas exploration and development, then you can transition your skills into other fields like geothermal. You can go from working drilling in oil and gas to drilling in geothermal. You can go from a well testing engineer in oil and gas to a well testing engineer in geothermal. You can go from a reservoir engineer in oil and gas to a reservoir engineer for geothermal, or a reservoir engineer for carbon capture and storage. So there's many ways for people to transition their skills because they're so similar. If you're dealing with subsurface resources, then it's easy to transition your skill if that's your background, right? So then there's still that need of conventional and unconventional people. I don't know much about solar, but I know that solar is not very difficult to get into, but you still need engineers. I think the one key role tying everything together is engineers.
Yeah.
All the different engineers are needed everywhere because all of these facilities will need to be developed. So you still need civil engineers, you still need mechanical engineers, you still need electrical engineers. So those roles they'll stand the test of time.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so I think that brings us into sort of our last sort of area of discussion before we open up to QA. And it's just for people on this call and for people listening, if you want to get into these different areas of industry, whether it's the transitional technologies and industries, sub-industries we've talked about like geothermal, or working in conventional spaces, and you don't have that experience, how do you go about doing it, right? Like what's the best way to go about doing it? And I think we've kind of talked about this a bit. Like there's different ways to do it. You could join an industry association that is for that specific area. Obviously networking with people, just meeting them, taking someone out to coffee to learn about their work and what got them there. Find mentors, both in these new energy industries and in conventional ones. What are some other ideas you have, Jason, around like what people can do to get into these transitional energies, or to even get employed in conventional settings if they have they have a different background?
I think we have been blessed. Most people don't realize the last 3 years there've been an onslaught of webinars on anything you can think of. So if you think you have an interest in geothermal, there are hundreds of webinars for the year you can always sign up for, and they're always free. Most of them are free. You sign up you listen 30 minutes to an hour to explore that aspect that you're interested in. If you're really interested, then you go on LinkedIn, you find somebody that's in the field that you like to get into, shoot them a message, say, hi, I'd love to learn more, and then you develop a relationship. So then you find a mentor, and then this person will help you to move through the stages of learning what you need to know. They'll help you to get resources, and then eventually they might help recommend you to get a job, or a next interesting thing to do is to go work on a project part-time. At EnergyGigs, it's one of our things, right? We can help you find that next project that you work on. You're looking for a short-term project to explore, learning something or something new field. We can help you to try to find that as much as possible, as long as they're a client, we can help you to find what you need. So there's many opportunities to explore the fields that you're interested in, especially as companies try to look to become more efficient without needing full-time staff. And in order to do that, they have to take advantage of freelancers, consultants, and gig work in order to help them get to their goal as fast as possible without having to go through the tedious process of HR. It can take a long time to hire somebody full-time and go through everything, right? So then that's also an option.
That's 100% right. I mean, I think that's sort of a way we like to work. We sort of eat our own dog food in that regard. We, trying each other out, so to speak. Companies should be more agile in how they hire, and try someone out for a project before you bring them on full time. And then that works both ways, right? For the freelancer or for the independent contractor, they can try out the company and know if it's a good fit, if they they have the companies share the same values that you share. So I think that's and EnergyGigs as a company, what we try to do is we try to provide those projects to the freelancers, the independent consultants, the small consultancy, small service-based organizations, as well as the big companies that would employ them. So that's kind of what our bread and butter. I think at this moment, maybe we will just pause. We've got about 4 minutes left. I just wanted to see if there were any questions. Anyone had any questions that they wanted to ask on the call? No? Okay. I see Maria, Maurice, and Isaac. Thank you all for attending. Please do reach out if you have any questions, or Juliana, are you seeing anything in the chat by chance?
Somebody raised a hand, but then it disappeared. I'm not sure who did. You can raise your hand if you want to make a comment, or feel free to write it in the chat or the Q&A section.
And you all can also anytime reach out to us offline via email, LinkedIn. I think you all know where to find us. So I think with that, if there aren't any other questions, I'll just say, like, give you guys a lowdown on next steps and what we're trying to do. So EnergyGigs, our beta, which is basically our kind of rough draft, if you will, of the platform, is live. So you can go in, you can create a profile either as a company user or a freelancer. And yeah, we'd love to hear any feedback you have. We know it's still a little bit rough around the edges, but you can sort of see where we're going with it. The goal is to eventually have all of our work coming on the platform. Right now, we're living in a hybrid state where Jason and I are providing client services offline, and we also do the online service. But eventually, the online service will sort of take the forefront of our business. In the next couple of months, so every month we're going to have a new webinar on different topics across the energy value stream, across the different subjects that we covered today. I think next month we have the CEO of Bedrock Energy, which is a residential geothermal company. Jason, is that right? Or a decarbonizing building?
Correct. Yeah, they're working on decarbonizing buildings.
Yeah. So that's going to be next month. But we'd love to hear any other topics that you guys would find important. Perhaps, Maria, we could have you on to do something about carbon capture later in the year. Yeah, if you have any ideas on topics that you would like to learn about to help you in your work, either as companies or independent consultants and freelancers, please do let us know.
Yeah, email Jason.
Yes.
Fisher, not Assir. Both Jasons, right? Send me an email with any webinar ideas that you have, and we can talk about it. If you have any friends, ideas, or people who may be interested in, just send me an email, CC them, and let's have those conversations.
Yeah. Okay. Well, unless there are any questions, we will let everyone go and grab lunch or grab dinner or go to bed. Isaac, I don't know, it's pretty late probably where you are. Yeah, thank you so much for attending, and look forward to seeing you on other calls and being in touch. So. Bye.